the journey to get to this point has probably been quite long. We agreed that we'd do it in a council meeting in I think October or November last year. It was delayed by the general election, and then I think it was going to be in March, and it was delayed by a pandemic. But there's something good in the delay, in that we are in a different we're in a much different situation than where we were.
Hi, sorry, I've just joined. Sorry
Hi,
about
Sonia, you're all right. Don't worry, you're fine. Nice to see you again.
Hi, sorry for the delay of getting on. There was a little bit of a technical panic, but hopefully, thank you for having me.
Don't worry, you're fine. I was basically just saying that we've been on a bit of a journey to get to this commission, and it was going to be a review of a previous report that was done in 2014. And that was going to happen late last year, but actually it's a good thing that it didn't happen, and it's a good thing that we're doing it now, because everything that we would have discussed probably would have changed in light of the pandemic. So actually doing this now is a good thing. The world is changing around us, and having a commission of this nature gives us an opportunity to be on the front foot, I suppose, looking forward to the future. So I thought, to help you, Sonia, I thought we'd go around and do a few introductions, and then if it's okay with other members on the commission, I'd like to put your presentation first, because I think it might influence some of our decisions about the terms of reference and any changes we want to make, and also to the work plan going forward. So if I'll read out the names of the people who are in, and then perhaps they can just introduce themselves and say who they are for you, and then we can start your presentation. But I saw your presentation at the Ellesmere Port task group. I was there, and it was really good. So I'm glad that you're doing it, because I think you'll really help us to set the scene. So if I ask everybody else to introduce themselves first, and then we'll go straight into your presentation. Is that okay? And you can introduce yourself then.
Lovely, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, I'll just read out the names in a random order that they are on this list. So I'm Richard Beecham. I'm the Cabinet Member for Housing, Regeneration and Growth, and I represent the Newton and Hall ward in Chester. Charles, you're the next one on the list.
Yes, I'm Charles Fifield. I'm a councillor for Weaver and Cuddington ward. My day job is that I'm a chartered surveyor, and I was the chairman of this working group when it previously reported 6 years ago.
Thanks, Charles. Gillian, you're up next. Is it working for you? Okay, we'll come back to you, Gillian. Caroline?
Hello, hi, I'm Caroline Thomas. I'm the Northwich Regeneration Programme Manager, but I'm going to have a view across the whole of Cheshire West and Chester as part of this piece of work.
Okay, Beth?
Hiya, I'm Beth Skinner. I'm a project officer in the Chester Regeneration team.
Thanks, Beth. Lynn?
You're on mute, Lynn.
I'm councillor for Marbury ward, and I'm the shadow for Housing, Regeneration and Growth.
Sam Naylor?
Hi Sonia, I'm Sam Naylor. I'm the councillor for Northwich Witton, which includes Northwich Town Centre, and I chair the Northwich Regeneration Forum.
Samantha Dixon?
Hi, I'm Sam Dixon. I'm the one of three councillors who represent Chester City and Garden Quarter ward, which is a ward of 18,000 people, which includes the city centre, but also communities such as Borton and Garden Quarter. Richard, can I just say,
yeah,
do you want us to mute ourselves? I can hear Charles shuffling his papers.
Yeah,
do you want us to turn our cameras off as well?
You can switch your cameras off and switch your microphones off if you're not speaking.
All right.
It's all right, Charles, don't worry. Steph?
Hi, I'm Steph Ramsden. I'm the Economic Growth Manager for Cheshire West and Chester.
And we'll try Gillian once again.
Hello, sorry I was on mute.
That's okay.
I'm Gillian Edwards. I'm one of the 3 ward members for Weaver and Cuddington ward, and I've also sat on the Mid Cheshire Development Board since it started as well.
Thanks, Gillian. That's brilliant. Okay, we'll save our questions until the end because I think it's just too hard to manage when somebody's doing a presentation. So if you want to make notes of any questions that you want to ask, and we'll let Sonia do her full presentation, and then hopefully there'll be plenty of time for some questions at the end. Okay, over to you, Sonia. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, I don't know where the presentation is. Is it there?
We'll start the presentation.
Oh, are you loading it?
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Okay, Sonia, you should be good to go now.
It's not come up on mine yet, on my screen. Have you got it all on yours? Yeah, there we go.
On ours, yeah. And we'll move the slide on for you as you need to.
All right, okay. Oh, I've asked to take control, so is that okay?
I think you can take control.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so if I just go back. Okay, just so that everyone knows who I am, obviously my name is Sonia Cabrillo, and I'm a director at Into Places Limited. I'm also a fellow member of the Institute of Place Management, and just recently we've been appointed by the government as an expert for the High Street Task Force. And primarily I've got over 30 years of experience working in a local authority in the Greater Manchester area, and as part of that I was head of neighbourhoods and communities with responsibility for town centre management. So hopefully I come with a background that I understand, you know, sort of like where you are all at, and just to give you some examples of what we did, you know, sort of like going forward, because I think it's really, really relevant, some of the experience that we've had, probably even more so today than ever before. So I'll come on to that in a minute. But just before moving on, some of the things that I'd like to just bring today is look at the national context and look at the challenges for the high street and town centres, and you know, sort of what do we face in town centres and how do we make them better going forward. But before doing so, I thought it was important just to remind us that before COVID, town centres were facing, you know, massive challenges even then, before COVID hit, and we had over 400 retail chains that had disappeared, closing over 30,000 stores. You know, over a period of time, the Retail Consortium predicted that there was going to be 90,000 job losses by 2025. Obviously, with COVID, that possibly is going to be even higher now. Vacancy rates had reached a high percentage of 40% in some towns. So we weren't in a good place, and obviously there were things that we needed to do, and some of the footfall trends were going in the wrong direction, as you can see from that graph, and that's something that we really needed to tackle. One of the things that was identified was around online spending and how that was a real threat to the high street. Now, if you look at the graph, it was projected that by 2028, 30% of our online, most of the shopping would be done online. Obviously, I'll show you a graph which shows the situation has slightly changed. At the time, we were looking at town centres, and there's a greater demand for people to have non-retail things. So it wasn't just retail, but they wanted leisure experience, they wanted a fitness, and really looking at how our town centres could be a community hub. And those are the things that we were looking at prior to COVID. So and because of the challenges that town centres were facing, the government did respond, and as you're all probably fully aware, it set up a high street task force to support town centres and a pot of money, which a lot of the councils have bid for, and I think over 100 have been successful to go forward to the next round. ground. But they have also set up the High Street Task Force, which obviously I'm a part of now, and it is to support some of the towns that are not going to be successful in securing the funding. And a lot of this came out of the John Timpson report, which he did a review in 2018, and actually John Timpson did come to Altrincham, which I was working at the time, to he did come to look at Altrincham in 2018 and looked at as a case study of what we actually did, and part of his recommendations came out of some of the stuff that we did in Altrincham. And as a response, the government set up all the task force, and obviously is looking to be around to provide tools and techniques that can support town centres going forward, and it's going to be around until 2024. So the government were responding in terms of how they wanted to support local authorities and town centres going forward. However, none of us expected this, but COVID hit, and when it hit big time, and it really affected us in ways that probably none of us ever predicted. And if we thought if things were going to close and we were going to have the lockdown, we probably thought it was only going to be for a week or two. Nobody thought it was going to be for nearly the 4 months that it was. And at the time, only food retailing was essential, and all the other non-food retailing weren't allowed to be open. So obviously, online retailing was allowed to continue, and it kept the postman very, very busy, and obviously delivery vans around. But it did affect obviously non-essential shops. And social distancing became a bit of a norm in shops and places and warehouses. So it started to change our lives, massively. And as you can see from the here, you can see the footfall went down in a drastic drop. Sort of only like 10% of what it was previously. Yeah, can everyone see that really well? Because I've got a bar which is at the bottom, so I don't know if it's the same for everyone.
It's okay on my iPad. I can see the graph.
Yeah, you can see the graph. So you can see that it went down by 82% and more overnight, and it obviously affected everyone massively. In response to the Institute of Place Management with the High Street Task Force developed very, very, very quickly a recovery framework to help support town centres. To support town centres, and it really looked at what do people need to do during the crisis, how can they get ready for the pre-recovery, what can they do during the recovery, and how can we lead that to transformation, because obviously we realised that the crisis was only going to be a short period of time, and we would recover from that, but it's just how we would do that. And there was a lot of tools and techniques which helped town centres immediately to respond, react, the bids, sort of like town partnerships and councils. And a lot of the tools were there to be adapted, and there's lots on the High Task Force webinars which will show you how towns did actually adapt that framework. So it wasn't, just one size fits all, but it was there to help people use it how best they could. And some of the things that we learned from the corona pandemic was impacted on all aspects of our lives that we just didn't even think. And obviously the town centres and High Street lost out largely to the internet and retail giants. Consumption changed, the way that we shopped, the way people were scared of going out really to be in the town centres or being just out socially. So it disrupted us massively. Social distancing became a norm. It's still the norm. Obviously the internet got a massive boost, but what it did highlight was the inequalities, and it made shopping a nightmare. But out of that came some positives, and sort of like the re-emergence of place, community and local stores. So people did feel confident supporting going in the local districts. and in the local town centres where they could walk to places. And it was great to see people shopping local. It actually gave a bit of that community spirit that maybe possibly wasn't there sort of been lost. Artisan producers started to deliver directly to consumers. So businesses had to start to reinvent themselves. What was good around some of the businesses is that businesses that didn't really know each other, hadn't really communicated with each other, had all started to set up networks of communication, WhatsApp groups, informal groups, just to share information of how they can support each other through the crisis. And so there was a lot of local collaborative internet selling, where people were signposting each other to those that were on the internet. Those with an online presence did reasonably well. There were ways in which businesses worked together to collectively do deliveries. So there was some really big big opportunities for businesses and the way people shopped locally. So there was some positives out of all that. But it's like, well, what happens now? And I think this from Phil Prentice really says, it's an unprecedented challenge, and the COVID is the reckoning that must spur us into action. And like you were saying at the beginning, maybe what we were doing before, we could press the pause button and really look at what we could do going forward. And the fight back has got to start now, particularly with, so there's still the challenges that town centres and the retail element face, with more and more big places closing. I mean, we've just learned of the going into administration. They own quite a lot of shopping centres. There's other, we had Warehouse, we had Oasis. All of those gone into administration. So so there's some real challenges where things changed. And if you remember from the graph that I put earlier on, you saw that the online retailing spending was forecast to be at 30% in 2028. Well, it reached over 30% within the period of the lockdown. So it had accelerated the way people shopped online a lot quicker. And obviously that is such a massive challenge for town centres and high streets going forward. But there was some encouraging news. So when non-essential retail was allowed to open, there was quite, in some places, not all recovered quite well, but there was glimmers of hope that people did want to go back out to the high street, did want to shop, and most people were recording, just up to 50% of the previous year's footfall. So there was some glimmer of good news amongst all that bad news. But what was interesting also is that the people that did open, 90% of stores did open during that week, and 20% of them had actually done better. I mean, it was very good weather during that week as well, so that did help. But 20% of the stores had actually said they were up on the previous year's sale. A lot of them were, 75% were sort of saying they were almost as good as last year. So there was some glimmers of hope. So that's the positive thing to take out of all that. So how do we build back better? And it really does give us food for thought. And the one thing that we've developed in 2 places is the rethinking regeneration framework, and it's based on our experience in Altrincham that we worked on sort of a number of years ago. So back in 2009, Altrincham was named and shamed, and actually the reason I raised Altrincham is because we had 1 in 3 empty units at the time. So it's much higher than people now coming back out from lockdown and some of the towns that are being faced at the moment. So we developed a framework which looked at what we could do. And we decided that we needed to do something which was about how do you engage the wider stakeholders and regrouping of the people that really had a vested interest and wanted to be involved. And it involved, you know, not just necessarily the council just being the sole owner of the town centre, which sometimes people think they are. It's around how do you take a much more asset-based approach to a town centre, and that's the way that we started to look at it in Altrincham. And when I talk about assets, and I'm sure, you know, being people with the council, you'll understand that it's not just the physical assets, it's more around looking at what can the community and the businesses actually bring within a town centre. And there's so much passion when you start to work with local communities. It's amazing what can really happen when you take that much more wider approach, you know, much more wider asset approach to looking at a town centre. Understanding your town centre, so rescoping, doing a health check, understanding, you know, stuff like what your catchment area is like, you know, so the deprivation levels are so important. Altringham's a very affluent area with pockets of deprivation. How are those people accessing the town? Well, at the time they weren't, for various reasons. The competition surrounding the area was just massive, you know, so people just voted with their feet and went elsewhere. And the other thing is, we did have a master plan, a physical master plan, and in part it did work, but in part it didn't work because it didn't really change the footfall in the town centre. It didn't really affect the retail aspect of the town centre, and people didn't really feel that they had that sense of ownership or vision for where the town was. So we really had to rethink the role of Altrincham and its vision, and who was actually involved in developing that vision. The key thing that we found was refocusing on communication. Communication was like almost the golden thread through everything. How you communicate, how you market, you know, once you've developed your vision, once you've engaged with the various sectors in the town, how you get those messages out there, and that was the golden thread throughout everything that we did. And obviously looking at different ways of being really, really innovative to you know, to place in the economy, and how we can encourage businesses that's slightly to what we'd had previously. So that's a framework that we used based on what we did. And some of the things that we started with, it was we had a new leader at the time who'd come in, and Matt is the person who spoke at the webinar on Friday. He was our leader at the council, and as officers of the council, he did call us all in and saying he didn't like where Altrincham was going. We were named and shamed nationally, and he really wanted a different way of working. And that's when we were able as officers to talk about, well, how can we be a bit more inclusive around rethinking, rather than just having a master plan that we just go out and consult with and maybe pay lip service to, but really get people to be part of the decision making and creating a network of networks to be part of the Altrincham town. And there was no easy way to do it. It is hard work through true engagement of working with all the different sectors. And what you do is you get people really coming forward and wanting to be involved, and you work with the willing, you know, the ones that really willing and want to put the time in. And that's what we did. So we worked with, you know, retail chains, independent bars, restaurants, the leisure sector, you know, sort of like the shops, the community, looking at landlords, agents, young people. We did so much engagement with young people and getting them involved. We actually went to every school, every primary school, secondary school, college, really involving young people in shaping the vision for the future for Altrincham.
And my internet, so I do apologise for that. In terms of the collaborative community partnership, that it was almost like a civic partnership that we set up. It started off being a network of networks, and we really started to look at who did we want to be involved and how can we get them involved, you know, using that community asset-based approach. And so we gave a real a call out to, you know, to arms, really, to saying to people who really wanted to get involved with their town centre, who felt strongly about it, what, you know, it was more around what you can do and what you can offer as well. So it wasn't, we didn't really want just a collective group of people complaining about what was wrong with the town, but more around what can we do together, how can we really transform Altrincham. And these are the sort of people that we actually engaged with, which are listed in there. And none of this is easy. I'm going to say that out to you all. It does take a lot of energy and it does take a lot of work. But once you start the process, it's amazing how it snowballs and it can really work for you. And people who, you know, we were getting people who were volunteering all sorts of their time, their energy, giving services in kind, all because they wanted to see a better Altrincham. And so, you know, we had landscape architects wanting to give their time for free, really looking to help support, develop this new Altrincham that everyone wanted to be part of. And so we really worked very hard. Young people were very, very interesting, because some of the ideas that people had around what the town centre should be like were not what young people wanted. And we spent a lot of time and a lot of energy as council officers really engaging young people, all the community groups, the brownies, the schools, the primary schools, the secondary schools in and around the Trafford College, wanting to be involved in the process and really engaging them to be, wanting to be part of something better and bigger and better. They were essential, because they're going to be the future, you know, sort of users of the town centre. So that was important. And on the last row, I was talking that, you know, everyone's important. The statutory agencies are really important. But one of the sectors that we've missed off there in the slide that we used on Friday as well at the webinar was the voluntary sector. The voluntary sector is sort of like a massive part of any town centre, and really can be a massive asset in terms of the resources that bring, the volunteers, etc. And I can give some examples after in the question times about what they actually did in Altrincham. And housing associations, they're missed off there as well, but they're massive providers in and around our town centres and can be a real key partners. So if we can just move on to the next slide. So we started to work, provide this network of networks. It started off very, very informal, really engaging with the people that wanted to come together, really starting to have a much more collaborative discussion around the vision for the future of Altrincham. And then out of that came an Altrincham Forward board. So we did formalise it later on, but in the early days, it worked very, very informally, and it really started to develop action streams of work that we really wanted to focus on. And with that, we developed a 12-month plan, which really started to change things around. And the key thing through all of that was the communication, keeping people informed in terms of what this new body was doing. And we actually took an empty unit and converted it into the offices of the Altrincham Forward, and it was staffed by some council officers and obviously volunteers as well from those various groups that really wanted to be involved. And it was very, very visible. There was on the picture that you might have seen on Friday, there was no council logo on that shop, on the frontage, but it was showing people that there's a real presence here and things are going to change. And that's exactly what we started to do. And then we started to break the work streams into really focusing on people, really focusing on the place and how we were going to revive their economy, you know, bearing in mind we had 1 in 3 empty units. And a lot of footfall leakage within the town. So just going on to the next slide. So some of the key actions that we took was, as we started to look at the empty units, you know, we didn't even have a register of landlords at the time. This is going back in 2010 of, you know, sort of like who owned all the properties. So the first thing we did was set about getting the registration, a register together, who owned which building, and writing to each and every single one of them, sometimes using the carrot, sometimes using the stick, depending on how poorly the property was, and really encouraging them, really giving a bit of a carrot to sort of say of how we could help them bring their units back into use. And we set up this landlords forum. And prior to that, a lot of the landlords, if they get an inquiry and they couldn't accommodate that inquiry, we would just lose it in Altrincham. But through the landlords forums, they could see how they could help each other. So after setting up the landlords forum, which involved quite a lot of work, we were able, landlords were sharing information of prospective interests. And that's how we were really getting our units back into, that communication, that relationship building, which is essential. Obviously, I won't go through all of the list of the things that we did, but it was really important to have all these elements of work to keep going at the same time and really show that there was activity and that this new body really meant there was going to be a difference. And where we started was that we did have a market, Altrincham Market, and that had been there since the 1200s, and it has the Royal Charter consent. And yet very few people were using it. It had lost its sense of purpose. And through this process, we actually got someone who'd never run a market before coming up with ideas of how that market could be run. And we took a massive leap of faith when we did our procurement, rather than do it in the traditional, where when you procure something, you score the pricing and at the highest. We actually scored innovation the highest, which was a massive change for the council. And we took a leap of faith, and that transformed into a food, drink, plus market stalls with artisan market traders as well. So it really changed the whole place and started to become a catalyst for the town centre. The public realm was really important as we progressed into the work, because we really wanted to change how the public realm looked, and we wanted to give more space in the town centre. And that has really worked well for now, where social distancing is important, because, when you go around Altrincham at the moment, and I went the other day, they've not had to put some of the measures that other town centres have had to, because there's space there to allow people to queue safely and give space between stores. So that was built in, not knowing that, we would be faced with COVID coming in the future, but has really helped in terms of that now. So there's a number of things that really happened. In terms of, if we could move on to the next slide. So some of the things that we learn is, people make places. Without the community assets, without people working together, I don't think we would have made the change that we did in such a short period of time. And we really transformed Altrincham from, and we actually brought back into use over 73% of units over a short period of time by working with others, creating a collaborative and shared vision where everyone's been involved in developing that vision was really important, because then it wasn't just the council's vision and it just wasn't the council's problem. It was everyone wanted to work together to make that change. Local leadership at all local levels, and sometimes it's a challenge for councils where as councillors you're voted in to make decisions on behalf of the electorate, but by sharing that leadership with the community and allowing some of that decision making to be shared as well was very, very effective for Altrincham. And the last one, we definitely knew that even though we had a master plan, it hadn't worked as well as we could have done, and we really needed to rethink what are the ingredients of rethinking regeneration in a town centre. Next slide, please. Something that I've talked about communities, and the power of communities can never be underestimated in terms of what they can deliver, what they can bring. So if we just go on to the next slide. These are just some of the examples across the country where communities have taken ownership of empty premises, community shops, created business hubs, community pub. The theatre one is one that I do want to talk about because I know a lot about this one. The theatre, the Stretford Public Hall was under the council's plans at the time to regenerate Stretford. They wanted to make it into a boutique hotel. The community came out and said, we don't want a boutique, that is a community asset. We really want to bring that back into the use of the community. And with the power of communities, they did. and they raised over £255,000. And they now run it as a theatre. They run it for activity, community space, and it prior to COVID, it was working very, very well. I'm not so sure where it's at the moment because, you know, we've been in a period of lockdown, but prior to that, it was hugely successful, and they've been running it for the last 18 to 2 years. So never underestimate what communities can do to help with town centres and how they can manage buildings. If we go on to the next slide. So a lot of things that we've learned through up and down the country doing the High Street Task Force, the work that we've been doing, and we're working with Sale Town Centre at the moment. And even though Sale Town Centre for Trafford Council at the moment wasn't one of its priorities, Stretford is, because they've put in funding for the High Street funding. The community with the the shopping centre owners came forward and asked us if we would work with them. And now we have got the council on board, and they are now really driving forward. So showing that real leadership and partnership way of working to really transform Sale itself, which had some challenges going forward. And so what we've learned is that you really do need to understand your town centres. So you do need that leadership, local leadership, and that partnership way of working. You need to know what your data is saying about your town. You need to understand the footfall. You need to understand the indices of deprivation. You need to understand so much about your town, because that knowledge can feed into how you make decisions and what's important for it. Vision, having that collaborative vision with the wider community and communication. Young people instrumental in having a voice, and Sale are already getting young people on board with their partnership at an earlier stage, and coordination without knowing, so that each part of the town knows what's going on. That can be sometimes very difficult and can work against the town. So coordination is important. Just going on to the next slide, please. Oh, is it stuck? This is a bit of a suggested. Are you okay? Are you still able to see the slides?
Yeah, I was just going to say it has moved on. Yeah.
Okay. This is something that, you know, sort of like it's just a suggested journey, if you know, sort of like just to help you, you know, sort of like on your journey, because you were talking about, you know, what you're thinking of doing. And we've given some ideas of maybe what you could think about. And it's only a suggested journey, you know, sort of like in terms of defining your stakeholders, you know, sort of evaluating what your space issues are, working together with your communities to develop a really strong collaborative vision, and then doing some short-term activity, you know, experimenting with various things and just reevaluating how things work, and if they don't work. For the, you know, when we did public realm in Altrincham, we didn't spend a lot of money on public realm. We just used planters and various things to put in strategic places to see how it would work and if that would work, because there's nothing worse than spending a lot of money and finding actually we didn't do the right thing there. So there's different ways in which you can do that. So just the next slide, please. And then that's the end of the presentation. I'm really sorry that the technical side of things has not allowed that to be seamless, but I hope there's a flavour there of some of the things that we did and might help going forward with yourselves. So thank you, and you know, I'm open to any questions.
Okay, if anybody wants to put their hand up if they've got any questions. Beth, do you want to stop sharing the screen? Unless anybody wants to go back to a specific slide, but we'll see. Lynn, you've got your hand up. Do you want to go first?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And I know Altrincham pretty well because I used to live there for years and my children went to school there. What did you do about the parking there? Because it was terrible for parking, and there were high charges and people were exiting you for the Trafford Centre. So I'm interested to know what you did with that, please.
You were right. The council saw the car parking charges as as a way to generate more income, but actually it had the negative effect on the town centre. So it did have to look at developing a transport and car parking strategy, which is what it focused on. And it did reduce certain key times to attract people in the town. So they did, I think on street, they did a 20p for an hour or two car parking. So they did really change how they looked at car parking, but they looked at it in relation to the interchange, in relation to the public transport. So it wasn't something just on its own. And it was looking at around how you could get sort of people to, use public transport more as opposed to coming in the car, and encourage, doing things that would encourage people to use public transport more. But at the same time, they did reduce the prices.
Thank you.
Okay, Lynn, any follow-up questions?
No, I'm fine with that, thanks.
No. Do you want to pop your hand down?
Sorry.
Sam Dixon.
Thank you, Sonia. That was really interesting. There was an article in The Guardian, which I can't find it now. You never can when you need it, that talked about how people were now reverting back to their very local shops for what they're doing. So obviously, we're talking about parades of shops in suburban areas. And I just wondered whether you feel that we might see a shift away from sort of larger centres into these smaller centres now, because people feel safer there and because the needs are met there. And if that's the case, are we going to have to look at different uses in the bigger centres? So, for example, for health needs, for sort of, we have our library and cultural centre in the centre of town, so that's a destination in itself. But given that shift might become permanent, do you think we need to rethink what we're using city centres and town centres for?
I do think there needs to be some thought given to that going forward. I think whether people are just using district centres or the local high street because it's a period of time, only time will tell. And as people get more confident, they will go back into town centres. I still think in terms of what the high street was looking at, is when you're developing your vision, it's looking at your own catchment area first and then looking at how you can attract visitors, which if you look at some of your own town centres, is sort of like, are you actually getting the maximum footfall from your own immediate catchment and your own residents? And that is something that's going to be vital in going forward. And I think people will start to, over a period of time, will shop local and want to be part of that local high street or the local town centre. But whether that's going to be long term, only time will tell. But I do think there's a role for each and both. And I think town centres, obviously with the retail element the way it is, will change, and there will be a balance, and it has to be a multifunctional place for people to want to come. And having those libraries and services in your town centres is going to be a draw for them, and people will still come in to use those town centres. And it's how you use your markets. Sort of like one of the things that they were talking around when they opened the markets were outside markets were very popular. One of the first things that were very popular after lockdown, and people were behaving themselves. And in fact, some of the market traders were sort of saying they were getting more of a stream of people past their stalls because they were going around a one-way system. So I do think it is important. Yeah, town centres need to be rethought, but there are as multifunctional hubs, and it's not putting your eggs too much in any one basket. It's around making sure you've got a good balance of residential, retail, services like libraries, sort of theatre, and hopefully they will come back and they will be used, and leisure opportunities. And I think, things have changed for the moment, but hopefully in the next, sort of like 12 months to 2 years, I think hopefully people will go back to supporting town centres like they have previously.
Any follow-up questions there, Sam?
No, that's really interesting. Although we have, in the work that we've done for a big development in the city centre called Northgate, we have identified that actually there is a catchment area that we can draw into the city. But I just worry that, our borough is quite diverse and quite geographically widespread. We could end up sort of pulling people out of other economic centres that are smaller in our borough and pull them in different ways. And it's like, how do we get the balance between all of these different sort of tiers, if you like? But
personally, I think if you work with your communities and your business communities, I think you can come to solutions where you agree what the balance should look like, and you look at what people want from those town centres and those local high streets districts that you were talking about. And I think you can come to a compromise, but it's got to be done with working with those people. Your business communities and your stakeholders that you've got there in the town centre to develop that vision for going forward. And it has, if you don't have a vision that's going to be fit for purpose, it's like that Henry Kissinger quote that if you don't know what road you're taking, all roads lead to nowhere. So I think that's the important thing. It's around how you have those conversations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia. Charles is up next. Charles has got his hand up next.
Thank you. No, very, very interesting presentation. It reminded me, I don't know, Sam Naylor's got a question next, which may well overlap, because I know he did a lot of work on the Northwich neighbourhood plan with my father, and I know they all went along to have a look at Altrincham Market. And I'm just looking at, on my computer at the moment, that I'm flicking between, it looks like it all seemed to happen around 2015/16, because the difference in the market building there is, 14-15, is quite extraordinary when you look on Google Street View, how it's gone from a very sort of dull municipal soulless high street in 14 to in 15, it's suddenly got a little bit of a sprig about it. And I just think that I'm just curious as to whether or not you've got any data from Altrincham as to how the market stalls have changed in terms of their use, because it looks to me like they've gone and put all of the food, fresh food and drink on the outside of the market, on the exterior side, so that you could access them from outside, whereas previously they, it was whoever got the pitch, so you had a lot of the clothes and more general goods were on the outside.
Yeah, I think they've been, yes, they were very careful to look at how they manage market traders at the time, because a lot of the market stalls were things that probably people in the catchment area, didn't really want to buy in the traditional sense, and they wanted a different way of. So we had two markets, one which was a lower market, which was much more the traditional market, and that's what they designated that. So those traders that wanted to remain in Altrincham could go on the lower market to create that more outdoor, sort of like traditional market. And the upper side, which lended itself more to be a mini Covent Garden feel, and that's what they wanted to develop. And that was the vision from Nick, who came forward, who didn't have any marketing experience. And we recognised as a council that we really didn't have the skills to develop it in that kind of way. We really needed somebody a bit more entrepreneurial around that, sort of developing those independent traders to form that collective and really form an experience where people did want to be. And that's how he did it. And so we started to keep some of the traditional market, but it was in a slightly lower down in the town, and use the top market as that more of a visioning, you know, sort of artisan kind of way of operating. It's slightly different, you know, looking at what people wanted. And he was very brave. He had a business plan and it worked. And, you know, prior to that, the council did outsource the market to another company. I don't know if I should name them, but they were called Group Cheshire, and I don't know if you've ever come across them, a French organisation, and who did French markets. And they we tendered the market and they won the tender. And we thought they would transform Altrincham market. And they did bring in a few French markets, but they brought in new, you know, sort of new traders. And then it was just on one day, and then they'd go away, and then we just have a normal market the rest of the time. And really, they didn't do anything other than put some nice canopies on the market stall. So it really didn't do anything for. And after 18 months, the council took the contract back into house because they realised it wasn't having that transformative effect that we really wanted to see. So when we did it again, when we went out, we were a bit cautious. But it was a leap of faith, and Matt, who was the leader of the council, who you may have watched the webinar on Friday, he actually really took a leap of faith in you know, appointing and a tender that was more innovative. So
No,
I hope that's.
Yes, I mean, just to say, if you do have any you know, plan of the market traders that might show over the course of the years what sort of uses were there sort of 2014 and what they've become now, because I think that may well show quite an important trend, actually, because I've been of the view for a long time that for markets to work, you need you know, fresh food, that sort of thing, is to get people in. And once you get people in, because they're coming through for that, then they'll go to the other stalls.
Yes, yeah, I agree. I think that's probably right.
That's really useful. Thanks, Sonia. Steph Ramsden's mentioned to me that she can circulate the link to the webinar from Friday so that we can watch it in our own time. Any follow-up questions, Charles?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Don't know if is. Oh, Sam Naylor. Sam Naylor's up next.
Yeah, thanks, Sonia. We're really interested. From a Northwich perspective, we're fortunate in many respects because, you know, we're not starting here with a blank sheet of paper. We're well into the regeneration process, and picking up on what Lynn and Sam and Charles has said, you know, we introduced car parking charges, must be a couple of years ago now, but they're about, a lot of them are about 20p level. I take it you didn't eliminate car parking charges in Altrincham. And Sam, really relevant in terms of, I think there's an opportunity for a town the size of Northwich to benefit from the fact that people might not want to go to further afield nowadays, and they'll come back to their own local town centre. And Charles obviously mentions the market. I don't know whether you're aware, our outdoor market was burnt down in January this year. And so we're looking at really innovative ways that we can kind of rebuild that outdoor market as an open space and what we're going to do with it. So, and also, of course, we've got, you've probably been to Northwich, we've got our biggest asset by, you know, a country mile is the river that's just ripe for development. So we've got tremendous potential in Northwich, and I'm sure we can learn a lot of things from you for what you did in Altrincham. But I'm pretty kind of optimistic about the future potential for Northwich. But a really interesting presentation, and thanks for that.
Yeah, I think from Northwich, I have visited Northwich, and it's got quite some architectural features as well, which is really interesting. By the river, I think, isn't it? If memory serves me right, it's a few years since I've been. And in terms of the town centre, because you have got a catchment area that when I went looked as though it was very local who were using Northwich. I think you can capitalise on that in terms of your future vision and making it fit for purpose. And what we say is we don't say that everywhere should have an altering the market, because I don't think an altering the market would work everywhere, the solution, but it's around finding what will for your town centre, and it's really working on the assets that you've got and building on that. And I do think you're right about how can you make that linkage. The linkages through the town centre are so important. In Altrincham, we had quite a long town centre, and somehow the linkages weren't natural and didn't work well. And we spent a lot of time working with the community, looking and with the business and stakeholders in looking at how the town centre threw a bit of money through the public realm. Because at the time, we didn't have any money when we started Altrincham. And then as we started the network, we started doing a lot of activity bits here and starting getting events going and getting people into the town and trialling various things. And then we started to look at Section 106 pots of money that we could use to help improve the public realm. And in the meantime, we just used, sort of temporary measures to test out whether those things would work, and we use planters a lot. I've got to be honest, we use planters to close down streets, sort of like high streets. The main, Stamford New Road was a main road through the Altrincham, and we used planters so that we could narrow the town centre, widen the pavements, but allow the cars to slow down as they went through the town centre, just to test various things that we think could work. And a lot of people gave a lot of their time in kind, landscape architects, to help rethink and give us ideas that we didn't necessarily have to hand about how things could, and making those linkages to places that didn't naturally link in the town centre. And I'm not saying we got it right, because you've always got to keep working at a town centre. And we've been talking to the leader of Trafford Council and sort of like they can't sit on their laurels, sort of with Altrincham. It always needs work and energy for town centres to be vibrant and, sort of like, and to survive.
Yeah, thanks for that. And just one final point, I'll have to get myself over to this Stretford Hall and have a look what they've done, because Gillian Edwards will back me up here. We've got a building in Northwich which is underused. Well, it's completely semi-derelict really, but with a bit of TLC, it can be turned into a wonderful asset, and that's an old Plaza cinema. So I'll have to go and have a look at Stretford Hall. Thanks again anyway. And
I don't know how it's doing at the moment, but, prior to that, they were really working hard and doing very, very well, and, creating lots of opportunities for Stretford community and residents to use that facility. So, do by all means, do go and visit it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sonia. Gillian, have you got any questions? No, Jan's not up, but I thought I'd check. Or any of the officers. Has anybody got any other questions for Sonia?
Thanks for that. No, just to agree with Sam that the Plaza building is absolutely stunning. Prior to lockdown, Sam and I were going to get together and talk about some ideas as well around that, and this is really timely now. I think the future looks really good.
The community share idea is interesting, isn't it?
Definitely.
Would agree with it. My question was just around the kind of the priorities of the High Street Task Force. Have they changed in light of COVID? I know you spelled out the kind of timescale for getting to the future High Street Task Force, but are there any discussions about about things that are going to get taken out of future funding bids or anything like that? Or is there going to be a change of focus in response to COVID, or are things just carrying on as they are from what you know, Sonia?
I don't think they've changed as it stands at the moment, but they are very keen to see things, sort of like recognising the COVID and what's been happening, and really around how space in town centres can be used. And I think they've actually issued some guidelines on that quite recently. You might have seen it. It's on the government website around public realm, because I think that's going to be really important. And I think obviously as town centres will become these multifunctional hubs, and you will have less retail, but then sort of what goes in there instead, sort of like, and residential obviously is something that a lot of places are looking, but you've got to get a fight. It can't just be residential. It's got to be a good mix of services for people to be in there. And obviously the leisure industry is a big part of that. And then obviously your transport links in and out of your town centre are so important as well. But they've not said, they've not specifically said that, but they will be looking for people to be acknowledging that, things have changed because of COVID and the pandemic, and it's around, well, how do we respond to that, and how will you rethink your town centre in light of that? And I think there's some great opportunities, and having seen how some of the businesses have been working together, I think there is a real appetite for partnership and collaboration amongst not only businesses, residents, but sort of like developers and other stakeholders. The NHS are rethinking some of how they can provide some of their services in the locality. So I think we're at a time where I think people are coming together more and thinking, there's merit in us being more collaborative.
I hope so. No, you're right. That sounds good. Okay. Anybody got any other questions? Should we move on to the next agenda item? Well, thanks very much, Sonia. You're welcome to stay around and.
If thank you. And I really apologise for the network, and I feel as that was, but it's that the time we're in. We have to face these challenges and overcome them.
Honestly, don't apologise. If you do want to stick around, we're going to talk about what our themes and content are going to be for our work programme over the next 5 meetings. You're welcome to stick around and feed in if you wish to, or just to listen to our discussion.
It's up to yourself if you want me. No, I'm happy to stay, and if you feel it will help and benefit you, I'm more than happy to stay with you.
Please do, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the terms of reference. They were circulated. The officers have worked around the clock to get all of this stuff ready because we had such a quick start to this in the end. But so the terms of reference, I think, were only circulated earlier today. If you've all had a chance to look at them, they were in a PDF earlier. It's just a couple of sections talking about the background to the paper that I talked about at the start of the meeting, the reason why we're doing this, and then an outline of what the group is and how we'll meet. Then our membership, which includes Charles as the deputy chair, which hopefully everybody will support, and then areas of focus. So is there anybody that wants to raise anything about those? If you want to put your hands up and say which section it is, if you want to make any changes, then let me know. If there is no hands up, I will assume that we're all in support. Oh no, we've got one. Sam Dixon. Far away, Sammy.
Sorry, Rich. It's in item in section 5, areas of focus.
Yeah.
It talks about the analysis of the economic impact of COVID-19. I do think that when we're considering, particularly from what Sonia was saying about communities and our relationship with communities, that it's not just the economic impact of this, it's the social and environmental impact as well. One of the points I wanted to say to Sonia was there is a real struggle at the moment to get government to release local data about COVID. So, this is playing out as we speak in Leicester. And in our borough, we have the data for our borough, but obviously we cover about 4 towns, 1 city, and a number of different sort of areas as well. So I think just to plead to Sonia, if she's talking to anyone influential, can you also make the point that we would like to have as much local data from government as possible?
Yeah, well, I can certainly pass it on through the High Street Task Force team.
It's essential for high streets to know that kind of granular data as we're coming out of this. So if you could, that would be fabulous, Sonia. But yeah, that's just the point I wanted to make on item 5 of the terms of reference, Rich. Thank you.
I think that's a really good idea. So we'll update 5.1 or either add a 5.2 or include it in 5.1 that basically talks about building relationships with the community and about an analysis of the social and environmental impact of COVID as well. Okay. Is that all right, Steph and Caroline?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great, thank you. Okay, next hand up, I didn't see which order they came in, so I'm just going to go to Charles first. Oh, it's only Charles. Go for it, mate.
Thank you. Yeah, it was just, I think, following on from Sam's point, just in relation to, obviously, there are other aspects other than economic impact and economic factors, although obviously the definition of a high street or a town centre is going to be it's going to be about the economics at heart of it. But I also wonder that Sam's comment might also be able to be looked at within the outline of the group as well, where we're looking at wider bits. And also, I think there are certain elements in relation to, I suppose, not simply COVID-19, but also the other factors that might affect different demographics. I know we've got elsewhere within here that one of the themes will be about accessibility, and that the council's access officer from the Disability Access Forum will be invited along. But I think we need to be mindful of that as well. That there are different demographics that have different social needs, but also economically that can be a useful thing for a town centre, in that if a town centre is, for example, accessible, that may well make it more attractive to the grey pound and the purple pound, which is both doing a social good and also an economic good as well. But other than that, I think those are fine. Okay.
You're on mute, Richard. Sorry.
Sorry, so I am. Does it say anything? I know it's in the work plan. Does it say anything about accessibility in the? Don't remember seeing it in the outline for the group. So can we consider putting something in there? I'm just reading it quickly again.
Yeah.
Can't see it.
Yeah, no, it was just, I was just thinking, in relation to Sam's point about obviously the social factors, etc., that perhaps an encompassing comment regarding other factors, economic and other factors, including social, demographic, accessibility, that might be a sort of catch-all way of doing it.
Perfect. Yeah, we can do that. No worries. Yep. Sam, is your hand still up to speak again, or is it just up from last time?
I just wanted to say that there are 3 words that sum up what we've just talked about, and that we need to create centres that are sustainable, that are resilient, and that are inclusive. And if you sum it up in that sentence, then it covers everything, I think.
Everyone happy with that? Sustainable. What was it? Sustainable, inclusive, and
resilient.
Resilient.
Yeah. Okay, with those changes, is everybody happy to support these? No objections? Yes. Excellent. Thank you. So we'll move on to the progress of the previous commission. So this was circulated earlier today as well. Hopefully everybody will have had a chance to have read the report that Charles did in 2014. There was the officer's original report, and Alison Knight was still working for the council, and then there's 2 appendixes, not even in 3 appendixes actually. There was the motion that was passed that triggered Charles's working group, and then his report, and then subsequently that was sent today was a PDF which summarised the recommendations from the 2014 report, and then gives an update on which have been achieved. So I thought we could go through. I don't think we need to go through them one by one. I mean, I'm happy to. I'm just conscious of time. But if there's anything that sticks out in anybody's mind from these, then raise your hand and we can talk about them. So I won't read them all out, but I'll just say the numbers, and then people can raise their hand as we go through if they want to talk about anything. So the first one's obviously number 1. Charles, you've got your hand up, and this was about each town and city centre having a high street in the borough which would benefit from having a place plan.
It was just to go and say as a general point. Yes, I did chair the report, but a lot of councillors did take part in it. So I'll happily take some of the glory, but I shouldn't take all of it. And especially Phil Previtt, who was the officer who dealt with it at the time, did a huge amount of work and research on it. What I was just going to say on the review of the report, what might be helpful is there are, within the original report, there were 11 conclusions and 7 recommendations. And this review has got 13 points. And what might be useful is I can work out where conclusions and recommendations have been amalgamated together or held separately. But it might be helpful if this was just reissued with, you know, for example, section 1 is both conclusion 1 and recommendation 1. But after that, it starts to split out a bit. And the second thing I was going to say is, in addition to this, if I could recommend that section 7 of the report, which is issues for consideration when future proofing town and city centres, would also, if you're trying to take the real crux out of the 2014 report, it would be these 13 bits that have been done there, but also section 7, which is again, it is only a page and a half. Because it shows what we were thinking 6 years ago, some of which is still relevant, some of which isn't, and some of which can certainly be added to. Jim. Okay,
I think we can do that. There's no problem with that. We'll have that for the next, to circulate with the papers from the next meeting. Charles, I think it might be easier if we do it this way round. Have you got anything that you wanted to bring up on here, any of the points and any of the progress that's been reported? It might be easier if we just each say individually.
I think when I went through this, the only particular points that I made were item 3, that it would be useful for the council, if it can, to work out the changes in the type of retailers and users in the town centre. Similarly to what I said about the altering of market traders, it's not just about the vacancy of people who are moving in, it's what type of traders there are, because for some retailers there's been massive gain, and it means, you know, the amount of retailers in that sector has reduced. For other retailers, it's been an improving time, so the amount of retailers in that sector has gone up. And so to us, for example, the vacancy level might be relatively static or slightly improving, but if you're looking at it in comparison to, say, hairdressers versus tobacconists, you may well see quite a significant change. Or even tobacconists versus e-cigarette sellers.
So just in the work plan, we're looking at kind of property around meeting 3 and around which type of businesses in meeting 4. So Steph and Caroline, can we pick up that request in those one of those 2 meetings on the work plan?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then
Charles, anything else?
Yeah, there was item just on the review of the last report, item 5. I just made a note there that on the update side of things that had happened was just to make reference to the Northwich neighbourhood plan, where again part of what they did was a town centre focus as part of the Northwich neighbourhood plan, which again, I know Sam Naylor spent quite a bit of time on that with Andrew Cooper and also with my father. So I don't know whether or not that's the bit that they did might actually be useful for reference in relation to the update section of
Is that number
5. Sorry?
Number 5?
Yeah, in part 5, yeah.
4 or number 4?
It may well cover both. I mean, I just put it down into section 5 because that's where it's had things like the Winsford High Street Fund and stuff like that, but it may well also apply to 4.
Okay. Cool.
And then I don't know if similar when Winsford's neighbourhood plan, if they also had a retail subcommittee looking at it. But other than that, that was that really.
Good stuff. Okay, Sam Dixon, you're up next. Unless, was that Sam Naylor trying to come in there? Yeah.
I just,
you
Richard, could I just ask Charles, given that this is being recorded, and I know that there will be interest in, certainly among residents that I represent, could you just describe for the record who your father is?
Oh, right, sorry, yes. As I mentioned, I'm a chartered surveyor. My company is Fifield Glynn. The founder of that is my father, John Fifield, who has been a chartered surveyor for about 50 years and is an expert in retail property, which is why he was helping out the Northwich neighbourhood plan. And as I say, he's also fairly well clued up on markets and things, which is why he volunteered his services to help the Northwich neighbourhood plan. And yes, that probably does make sense, as I say, the things being recorded.
Can we add the declaration of interest to the agenda? Actually, I think that would probably be a good idea if we could do that for next time as well. That would be good.
Yes, I think that might be sensible for me as well.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. Sam Dixon, have you got any other points about the work that's gone on since 2014 in this document?
No. I've got some comments on the work plan. Thanks.
Okay, great. Any other councillors? Councillor Gibbon, you've got your hand up. Who would like to go next?
Yeah. Thanks, Richard. It's in relation to the number 1, conclusions and recommendations. I'm aware, being on a number of these groups, the Weaver Square Master Plan is in the process now of going out to consultation. And if I remember rightly, schools, young people, and all of those categories that the lady who did the presentation said are not included in that consultation. And I think that should be reviewed. Now, I don't know where we are with a number of the other ones, but if that could be done, they obviously made some very good points that they took on board in Altrincham, and I've never seen children, schools, colleges included in those consultations. So it might be worth considering where we are in relation to consultations in each of the strategies.
I think we're in luck, given that both Caroline and Steph are running that consultation, so hopefully they've picked up your comment, and we'll be able to take those on board. With this new, Steph's just messaged me to say there's the Participate Now platform as well, which we can utilise for that. This system that the council's using at the moment, so I think that's a good idea, Lynn. Okay. So any other councillors? Lynn, you've still got your hand up. Sam Naylor or Gillian, have you got anything you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, Sam here.
Yeah, go for it, Sam.
Both with the neighbourhood plan and with the initial consultation regarding Weaver Square, we did hold events and visit places to make sure that we captured the views of young people in particular. We did a session at John and Dean's College, for example. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Lynn that it's vital that, particularly in view of what Sonia said in terms of Altrincham, that we do capture the views of young people in Northwich.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Any others, or shall we move on? I'm happy with these. We can make those changes that we've discussed about adding the neighbourhood planning, something about adding about different demographic groups for the consultation that we're undergoing at the moment. But if there's also anything in the work plan around how we do consultations and how we include people, I know in the next meeting we're having some different groups of people to come and speak, and that might be an opportunity to consider how we do those kind of things there. And then Charles's other point about the other recommendations that were in the report in section 7. So if we can pick that up and recirculate for next time, that would be good. And then final bit before we move to any other business is the work plan. I've frantically written down some notes just from Sonia's presentation, but I think I'll just run through them week by week, and then or meeting by meeting, I should say. And if anybody has got anything to chip in, just pop your hand up. So obviously we've done the first meeting today. The next meeting, if you follow the kind of train of thought of Sonia's presentation, looks at kind of the economic situation in our borough in different areas and the different impacts of COVID and perhaps Brexit and other kind of bigger events that are happening in the world at the moment, and what that means for for the future of our high streets. And then this user group's perspective idea, which chimes with what Lynn's just said, and about trying to understand what different groups expect from their town centres, and obviously having people to come and speak. So if anybody's got any ideas for people that could come and be representatives, I know the officers are already contacting people, but you can either provide them to me or directly to Stefan to Caroline. But has anybody got any points about this second meeting? Go for it, Sam Dixon.
Thanks, Rich. I think it isn't just an economic review of each area. I think it needs to be a bit more broad than that, and sort of things like demographic information is helpful. You know, we've all got our ward profiles, but actually for each sort of each area, it would be helpful to have, you know, if it is the case that the population's ageing, or in some areas, for example, Winsford, I imagine the age group is dropping slightly as more families move in. It'd be interesting to know if there's shifts in that sort of demographic, because I think that'd be really helpful to us. I mean, you could include information like, you know, benefit claimants, but I don't think it would be particularly helpful at the moment, because I think we're just going to see a huge leap in the next couple of months that might not be representative of a more sort of longer term picture. But I don't know if those things do leap, then we need to know. Thanks.
Okay, we will see if we can. We don't have any support with this at the moment to do this research, but I think we'll be able to go away and ask for it, because I think it's really important, especially given the presentation that we've just had. So we will expand the reach from just an economic investigation to a social and demographic investigation as well, to understand who shops in what towns, who lives in what towns.
I think it could be quite high level, Rich, and it could be quite high level, and I think the information's already there. The Northgate team already have it, so.
Do they? Okay, great. Councillor Gibbon.
I don't know where this will fit in, but it was based on that lady's presentation. She said there was a landlords forum, which quite interested me. Now, I don't know whether we have all the landlords in each of the town centres. We may have it, we may not. But I would like to know that if we could find it and put it on, you know, be part of the discussion. And then we're undertaking a property review across Cheshire West. I'd like to see the property review for each of the town centres that we're looking at, so that we can make, you know, it could be a good discussion, and it's based on fact of what is empty, what's not empty, and especially council-owned property. So I don't know where that fits in. It does say funding property review in number 2, but it doesn't say what that property review is. So I just wanted to make sure it was that type.
I think it's in meeting number 3, funding models and property overview. Yes. If we could have some kind of consideration about how we would go around making a landlord list and a landlord forum in that meeting, because I do agree with you. I think that's absolutely essential, given the. I
thought that was a really good idea. Yes.
Yeah.
And totally as we're doing our reviews, perhaps they can work on that now, so that we get a property review for each one of the town centres we come to look at. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Rich, it's possible that
yeah.
the development boards already have those lists. So
Okay, we'll pick that up and we'll have that for, I don't think we're going to have set up a landlord forum by meeting 3, but certainly we should be able to be talking about how we would go about it and what it would be, how it would be looked at, and what information we've already got about how to contact people. I think that would be reasonable. Councillor Gibbon, have you got your hand up again, or is that the same as last time? I think it's the same as last time. Okay, anybody else? Charles, you wanted to say something else?
Yeah, sorry, me again. I was just going to go and say on meeting 2 is again similar point to what I think Sam and Lynn have been saying about the data that we might be able to access. I think the council gets data from the local data company, and also there is a bespoke data company, I think, that it uses, which I, needless to say, I had it to hand and then the damn thing has disappeared.
We have Springboard, don't we, which gives us footfall data.
Yes, there's I think that is the one that I'm failing to find in my stream of emails. So yes, there would be that one, and then the other thing I was going to go and say is when I mentioned earlier about part 7 of the 2014 report, I think that one might well be worth actually looking at as an item at the next meeting, just literally going through it, because when you read through it, it's got quite a few really simple questions that we all ought to be asking ourselves as we're doing this. So it might just be worth reviewing that, and potentially in between this meeting now and the next meeting, potentially some of us sending if that could be circulated amongst the group potentially, so we can add a few things in before then. But I think that was that on the comments section too. And then the only other bit was on this work program itself. Could we also have the meeting dates on it?
Yes,
that would be somewhat helpful. The idea of a landlord.
So Charles, were you saying then that you wanted to see the data, have the data circulated ahead of the meeting, so we could have a think about it before? Well,
I think, or potentially the sources of the data is it would be nice to be able to go and have all the data under the sun ready for the next meeting, but the reality is that's not going to happen. And I think what might be better is to sort of have potentially an appendix list of data that says, right, this is the sort of data we're going to pull together. Have we missed anything? And it's probably better to be asking that question now than in 4 or 5 weeks' time.
Yeah, I think some of it might be, depending where it comes from, some of it might be commercially sensitive. So we'll have a think about that one, and we'll see what we can do, basically.
Yeah, because the other thing, I think there's a company again which the council may or may not subscribe to, which is Experian Goad, and that does provide quite a lot of demographic data. The word goad is an industry-specific one, which effectively is Experian have a subdivision called Goad, and they produce retailer maps known as Goad maps, and they are very useful. If you track the history of those, you can see again the changes in the types of users that are within properties. So it's quite it's really quite useful, that information. Thank you.
Okay, Goad maps. Councillor Gibbon, you had your hand up next.
Oh, wrong.
We will come back to you, Councillor Dixon.
I'm just aware that this is the next meeting is an evidence gathering session. And I think that actually a lot of the things that Charles is talking about, I think the development boards will already have access to. I think we need to use the information that's readily available to us. It's all there. So I think that we need to get the officers to and because we need to act very quickly on this, but also very efficiently. And sort of reinventing the wheel isn't going to help us move forward as quickly as we need to.
That's fine. I think if we will ask Steph and Caroline to see what we can find from the existing places then, and see if we can pull it together into something that that we can present to the next meeting. That's really good. Okay, so I think we've done meeting 2, we've kind of done meeting 3, unless there's anything that anybody wants to add. Put your hand up now. No. Meeting 4 was about business improvement districts and getting some people in who are large anchor tenants, getting some people who are independent and small businesses to come and talk to us, people from different markets and offices, office space and all that kind of stuff. So again, similar situation. If you got somebody who you think would be good, who would be informative for the group, then do let me know. If there's anything that you feel should be added into that meeting, then put your hand up now. Okay, and then meeting 5 is about policy and promotion. This includes planning, transport and accessibility, things about pedestrianisation, sustainable transport, sustainable travel and transport, destination management, getting a national perspective on why people would come to our area and that kind of stuff. And then potentially some more expert witness. Sam, you put your hand up. Speak now.
Yeah, I just thought this was an opportunity to bring in the climate emergency agenda. If we're talking about policy. Yeah. Thank you.
Very good. Sam Naylor.
Yeah, I don't know whether this section you're talking about applies to what I'm going to say now. It's only in the early stages, but quite a bit of work is done. If we're going to call evidence, it specifically relates to Northwich, but it applies to the other kind of urban areas as well. I'm talking about the waterway strategy. I've already mentioned the asset of the river in Northwich, but for Winsford, as an example, you've got the flashes. Chester, we know we already kind of use the waterway there. And Ellesmere Port with the boat museum, that type of thing. So I think it's vital that we
very
make
good point.
The most of. Yeah.
Waterways and how that feeds the town centre and public places and making it places where people want to come and visit. Yeah, I do. I like that. Charles, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, it was just to follow up what Sam Naylor just said. I think that perhaps it might be a sort of catch-all where you've got almost like waterways, culture and tourism. Is that that then covers it in that obviously Northwich has got the river Weaver and the Dane that meet there. Obviously Chester has got the River Dee and it's got the Roman walls. So there'll be different types of things that affect the different town and city centres, but I think they could sort of come under that into maybe that sort of umbrella to take account of the fact that, if we're trying to pull people in, we shouldn't dismiss the natural resources that the town centres have, and certainly the tourist / cultural appeal that's already there.
Can I just say that I think that marketing, if we took evidence from Marketing Cheshire, they're very aware of the sort of destination requirements of all of the areas of our sub-region actually, but particularly of our borough. They attend all of the development boards, so they're plugged into the strategies that we've got around waterways. So I think evidence, it talks about a destination management organisation. I think Marketing Cheshire's it. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Get Marketing Cheshire in. Yeah. Okay, good. I was just thinking about Sonia's presentation and the rethinking regeneration framework, and how we kind of. I know we're nowhere near there. We can. Lynn wants to say something too. I'll just say this point. Just thinking about when we get to our reporting stage and how we couch what we're doing. Do we want to try and couch it in this in the framework of the 7 R's? Regroup, rescope, rethinking, revitalise and refocus. That's something we want to try. Is that what we want to be thinking of our theme as we go through?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Well, for me it would. I don't know about the others.
I do too. I mean, I think we may as well follow what's happening with the current thinking. Okay, Lynn, you want to say something?
Yeah, sorry, I lost it, that everything went before. It's relation to number 5 of the 7 recommendations. It says in there that the impact policy for Chester is helping to prevent a proliferation of fast food takeaways, fans and bars and clubs. Has this been evaluated? Is there information that we can take from that? You know, what was the outcome from that?
I missed you, sorry, Lynn. It dropped. Can you just say
it's in number 5.
About number 5, yeah.
Yeah.
Are we going? Sorry, Lynn.
Cumulative impact.
Yeah.
What?
So, Lynn, this was a policy that came in 2014 and has been renewed in Chester City Centre. It's a licensing policy. It was covered in the former work of the old thing, but given the situation that we're in currently in terms of licensing, the landscape is so drastically different, particularly leading up to Saturday, that I don't think a discussion of the cumulative impact policy is going to be helpful right now in terms of the other things we need to talk about. That's just my view as the City Ward member. I mean,
is that because of the
whole licensing framework is very different day by day at the moment.
Is that because they've just, you know, they're basically saying anybody can be outside, and you just think it's changed so dramatically from where it was that actually there's no point reviewing it until we see what sticks and what doesn't?
Well, I think a discussion about the usefulness of the cumulative impact policy in Chester is sort of academic right now. Whether it's, you know, what we come out the other end of COVID and actually what happens on Saturday night, and the response of the public and the response of the licensed trade, it is something that is very live right now. Whether we consider that it's a very sort of specific area of a town centre's sort of trading perspective, and you know, whether that's it's just in such a state of flux right now. I mean, in our subcell at the moment, the discussions around licensing, it's changing. The guidance is changing from central government about things like off sales, about al fresco. The al fresco arrangements changed overnight. They changed today. So, you know, I mean, I don't think a discussion on the cumulative impact policy is going to help us right now. It has been useful in Chester over the past couple of years, again, about a proliferation of the late night economy. But to be honest with you, I'm not sure we're going to have a late night economy between now and November, but we just don't know, do we?
Well, I was thinking further into the future than November, and I just wondered if it had been evaluated, what were the key points that were considered? That's why I was referring to that.
Well,
bit.
it was readopted, Lynn. So you can look back when we adopted the licensing policy at full council, and the recommendations that came through from the licensing committee included a full evaluation of the cumulative impact policy, and it was readopted. I can't remember which year it was. I think it was about 18 months ago.
Okay, thanks. And then just one other. All the town centres, the way things are changing now, IT is Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi across all the town centres. Now, I don't know where that fits in. You know, it's not got a little piece on its own. I just don't want it to be missed about, you know, local town centre apps for the use of the public and the restaurants and the bars, and what kind of offers are on, where your parking can be, what events are on today. I think it's a crucial part to going forward, and I don't see where it's not obvious as to where it fits in, so I don't want it to be lost.
No, okay, Lynn. I think probably either in 3 or 4 would be my advice, and I'll see what we can do with that. I mean, we obviously there are plans for town centre Wi-Fi. I know it's still being discussed in Chester. Yes. I was in a meeting about it the other day. So maybe an update on that and what's happening in other places is a good idea. And we'll figure out which one of those meetings is the best one for it to go into. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Everybody happy?
Yep.
Good. Any other business?
No, thank you, Rich.
No. Date of next meeting
No, thank you.
is the 15th of July. A couple of weeks' time. Gives us that time to get that data. All right then. Thanks everybody for your involvement.
Thank
Sonia,
you.
still here. Thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for your time. We really
Thank
appreciate
you.
Thank you.
it.
Goodbye,
And thanks
everybody.
to all the officers.
Thanks,
Take care,
Rich.
everyone.
Thanks to the
Bye.
officers.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.